Just a reminder to please turn off or turn on your microphones prior to speaking to allow the audience and home viewers to be able to hear your questions and any discussion. I will call this meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission to order at 7 p.m. Would you like to take roll, Terry? Thank you.
Ms. Holliday? Donald?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Shepherd? Ms. Urban?
Here.
Mr. Weiss? And Mr. Hayes?
Here. Here.
Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, there is one. We will not be reviewing the minutes of the December 3rd, 2025 meeting tonight, as staff is still reviewing them. You'll notice there's a note on your agenda that the previous approval of these minutes was not valid. You guys did do a roll call on them, but there was no motion preceding that, so we'll just do it over.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, we do have minutes, though, that are available for approval. It looks like minutes from April 1st, a regular meeting, and minutes from May 6th, which was also a regular meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I would move to approve the April 1st minutes.
Okay. Is there a second motion for the April 1st?
I second.
And do any members of the commission have any corrections or amendments to make to those minutes, the April 1st minutes?
Oh, yeah, it's one very small under section G, old business. So this is actually on page 5. I know what I intended to say. I haven't looked at the recording to see if that's how it quite came out. But at the end of the first, paragraph there, where it says, he stated that they had questions about how widening would be possible in those areas. I know that I meant some areas because the phrase before that refers to the area of Florida where it was obvious how they would widen the streets. They would do that by impacting university property. But as you go east along there, and then you have residential on one side and a park on the other, it becomes much less clear. So if the word in those areas could be changed to some areas, that would be, I'm sorry, this is on, if you're on page 5, about 10 lines down, probably it's towards the end of that first paragraph. Possible in those areas would become possible in some areas. Sorry for something so micro, but it jumped out at me when I was reading through everything.
Okay, any other comments or additions? Okay. All members in favor of the motion to approve, please say yes.
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 And all members opposed, please say no. Okay, the April 1st minutes are approved as corrected. And then the next minutes are from May 6th. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
I move to approve the minutes for May 6th.
Is there a second motion?
I second.
Okay, do any members of the commission have any corrections or amendments on these?
There's, it's just a spelling error, 'cause on page 7 of the minutes, it says raised, R-A-I-S-E-D, which means to lift something up, and it should be R-A-Z-E-D, raised, like tear it down.
Oh, good catch.
Any other corrections? Go ahead.
Yes, on page 3, towards the bottom in the paragraph that begins, she went on to say that part of its perception. I think that there's a misplaced word or an extra word in there. The third sentence that starts, so even if there is no financial gain, if a member is not personally related, or if that person was part of an application. And I think that's supposed to be So if there's no financial gain, or if a member is not personally related, comma, if that person, sorry, I'm even losing this. It would be if that person was part of an application, right? Because the point is that the way it's written, it makes it sound like if you were part of an application, hang on, I have to sit with this for a second, sorry. I got so caught up in reading this earlier, but give me 1 second here. I'll distract you with a second correction in the meanwhile. On page 4, in the second paragraph, the second to last line, Urban recommends having the historic plan should probably be historic preservation plan. Is that right? Okay, sorry, let me reread this. As I was reading it earlier, it was not making sense, but yeah, I still hold with what I'm saying. The issue is if a person's part of an application, it wouldn't look good. And that's true even if the person there's no financial gain, and even if they're not personally related in some way. So that or shouldn't be there. That sentence as it is not actually correct, because it implies that there's a sequence of 3 conditions. There's no financial gain, the member's not personally related, or the person was part of an application. But it actually is saying if a person's part of an application, then they should recuse themselves even if they don't have financial interest and even if they're not connected. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
So, okay, so I would just suggest rephrasing it. If that person was part of an application, it could potentially not look so good, even if there's no financial gain or if a member is not personally related. So just to take the first half of that sentence and move it to the end. Because the discussion before that was about exactly that. Dennis, it was following a question that you had asked, right. And it was also pertaining to a situation, in which Kate Holliday was involved, so, okay.
Okay, any other edits? So we had page 3, page 4, and page 7. Raised is on 7. Okay. Okay, all members in favor, please say yes.
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 And all members opposed, please say no. Okay, the minutes are approved as corrected. We're ready for written communications?
Yes, we have 3 items of written communication. I will start with Mr. Roberts, has sent Hi New Planners, thoughts of a mayoral vision for Urbana. This was a document drafted, dated February 2025. Mr. Roberts states probably drafted 2 years earlier. And he calls out the fact that he mentioned the Civic Center for Adaptive Reuse as one of these parts of the mayoral vision. And I will read item number 6 of the mayoral vision. Reuse of Urbana Civic Center, renew, not demolish, a renovation for permanent use, year-round farmers market or civic performance space like cinema or stage, or rental space for parties and celebrations. We also have a communication from Kate Holliday, and I will read this verbatim as she instructs to be read aloud. Please find my comments on case number HP 2026L-01 to be read aloud at the Historic Preservation Commission meeting on June 3rd, 2026. I regret not being able to attend the meeting and fully support the submitted landmark nomination for the Urbana Civic Center. Okay. I am sorry to be absent from this important meeting on June 3rd, 2026, and to miss the vote regarding the nomination of the Urbana Civic Center as a local landmark. For the record, let me begin these comments by stating my strong support for the nomination, which is clearly argued and makes a strong case for the integrity and significance of the Civic Center as a centerpiece of this community, for its design, its social meaning to multiple generations of people, and its prominent, distinct visual identity, the city grid under criteria A, C, D, E, and F, as noted in both the staff report and the nomination. Thank you to the community members who researched and wrote this excellent nomination. I'm a professor of historic preservation with more than 15 years of experience in regulation and policy related to historic preservation. I'd like to add just a few short thoughts to my support of this nomination. First, the building hit the 50-year mark in 2020, 2 years after it was suddenly closed in 2018 in the midst of a budget crisis. The 50-year mark is significant for many reasons. A building typically must be 50 years old to be eligible for recognition as a landmark. Also, when buildings turn 50, they typically need maintenance of all kinds: new roofs, appliances, plumbing and electrical repair, code updates, etc. These are all completely normal needs for buildings as they are used across time. There is nothing deficient about the design of the Civic Center that has caused its need for a new roof. All buildings need new roofs, bathroom updates, and kitchen updates. The city's decision to postpone those repairs and maintenance is the issue, not the building's condition. The building's condition is in fact excellent for a now 56-year-old building that has had routine maintenance neglected. I have seen buildings in far, far worse condition come back to life through a thoughtful and reasonable restoration. Second, the consultant's report commissioned by the MTD during the NEPA/Section 106 process was drastically incorrect in its assessment of the building. The consultant failed to identify the architect, erroneously identified the building as postmodern, and made numerous other errors of fact and interpretation about the building that could have easily been discovered with only modest effort. I mention this not to assign blame, but to be clear that this consultant's report did not and does not provide a reasonable basis for decision-making about the building. The State Historic Preservation Officer's determination that the Civic Center is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places is a key finding and provides opportunities to explore tax credits and other state incentives for reuse and preservation. If the Commission had been aware of this determination, it would have pursued this nomination more than a year ago. Third, this building represents a truly important part of the history of Urbana and the history of architecture in Illinois. The city grew rapidly in the 1950s and 1960s, and the Civic Center project represents a civic belief in the importance of providing public meetings and gathering space for the community. The list of civic organizations, individuals, and events listed in the nomination is truly a record of Urbana's extraordinary civic culture. A photograph inside the Civic Center office shows the actor and Urbana native Ed Asner speaking to a gathering of the Champaign County healthcare consumers. There is nothing else like it in Urbana or Champaign. The farmers market occupies the Lincoln Square Mall parking lot, but with the closing of the Civic Center, there is no other public space for people to gather indoors. The Aquatic Center, park pavilions, and the public library do much work to serve the public, but they do not offer the same ability to gather. The library, aquatic center, and park structures also do not turn a profit or pay for themselves. They are provided by the city as needed public good. The expectation that a civic center would turn a profit is not in keeping with other civic institutions in Urbana. The architects who took on the charge for the Civic Center created a generous public space for gathering, using the 4 pyramidal cupolas to bring natural light into indoor rooms, using Douglas fir, cedar, and brick to provide warmth to a space wrapped with steel and glass windows. Smith, Seton, and Olak's work shows the influence of their teachers at the University of Illinois, especially A. Richard Williams. The track lighting provides directional light mixed with the diffused natural light. The cement cylinders filled with stones provide drainage basins for water from the roof. These elements combine modern materials and design with ancient techniques. Perhaps we cannot see the building's generosity and innovation clearly today because it is being used as a surplus furniture warehouse and we are blinded by its need for maintenance and reinvestment. Fourth, the Civic Center is ripe for reuse either as an integral part of a transit center or fulfilling other aspects of the Imagine Urbana city plan. Imagine Urbana emphasizes sustainability. New construction is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Adaptive reuse of a landmarked building is the most socially and environmentally conscious strategy. Imagine Urbana also emphasizes the unique nature of our community and retaining the assets that emphasize it. The Civic Center has enormous potential as a transit center, a community center, a preschool, or a makerspace. Citizens have testified before council in just the past few months about the need for places for community members to gather and pursue activities together. The Civic Center site is at an important junction between Main Street and the Boneyard Creek Trail, pushing the bus toward Vine Street to keep buses on major arterial roads instead of blocking pedestrian passage with idling buses would have a huge benefit. There are many ways of thinking about the transit center project that have not come to the table because of a predetermination about how this site should be used. Finally, I would suggest this moment provides a great opportunity to think about what expertise is needed to assess city assets, from culture to real estate. The MTA's hired consultant that assessed the Civic Center did a poor job in this case. Architects and historians who deal specifically with existing buildings and have experience working within existing building envelopes with the goal of reuse should be at the table when the city is making decisions regarding development. Practitioners with experience in the reuse and reinvention of buildings are best able to assess future possibilities. As the newest member of the Historic Preservation Commission, I hope that the HPC will be consulted in many more planning projects. This is not because I believe the HPC should have final say. It is because the HPC's input is an important foundation for informed decisions by council and our mayor. Okay. Third, on our written communication, we received a memo presented to the MTD board. This is a public document, and the meeting from this is available online, but it was shared with the Commission for Universal Awareness. This is Ashley McLaughlin to Carl Gnat, May 27th, 2026. This was introduced to the MTD board, speaking about intention to apply for funding through the Federal Transit Administration's Buses and Bus Facilities Grant Program to construct a transit center at the site at 108 East Water Street in downtown Urbana. The background, important points of this would be in letter E, background. And MTD did not ultimately submit an application for the US DOT build application grant. However, instead, there are plans to submit a buses and bus facilities grant application should the City Council vote against landmark status. MTD has stated that should the Urbana City Council vote in favor of landmark status for the building, they do not intend to submit a buses and bus facility grants application for the construction of a facility at this site.
Thank you, Kate. So, we're not having any discussion about the messages or anything, are we? We're going straight to audience participation? Okay. Just to double check. We are ready for, oh. Okay, my apologies. Hopefully that's better. Yeah, good. Okay. So now it's time for audience participation. If there is anyone in the audience who would like to address the Historic Preservation Commission on any topic, you're each allowed 5 minutes of uninterrupted time to speak. There won't be any replies or comments or questions from the commission members. Just be sure to state your name and where you're from. Thanks.
Good evening. I'm Paul DeBevick. My wife Liz Cardman and I live at 303 West Nevada Street. We are longtime residents of Urbana. From mid-2024 to mid-2025, I was a member of the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board of Trustees. In my time with the board, I learned that the MTD is an exceedingly well-run organization. The MTD has been successful in the competition for significant federal grants for transit infrastructure. For example, the downtown Champaign terminal. The MTD has had a long time interest in developing a downtown Urbana facility. In discussions with the city of Urbana, it spent considerable effort in the consideration of the site of the Urbana Civic Center. These considerations are on hold pending action of the Historic Preservation Commission and Urbana City Council. The position of the MTD is stated in their recent May 27th board meeting. In fact, you just heard what that position was. If the Urbana City Council votes against landmark study status, MTD staff intends to submit a grant application. If Urbana City Council votes in favor of landmark status, or if the vote hasn't taken place by the time grant applications are due, MTD will not submit the grant. In your meetings of February 18th, April 1st, and May 6th, a good deal of discussion was directed toward the possibility of adaptive reuse. It's fair to ask, what of the Urbana Civic Center can be reused? I base my comments totally on the presentations by Vince Gustafson, Director of Public Works, and Troy Richmond, Public Facilities Supervisor, comments made to City Council on April 1st and to this body on May 6th. Entryway railings, too rusted. Entry walkways, not ADA compliant. The unique rooftop cupolas, require complete replacement. The roof, it must be torn down completely and replaced. The building envelope, the extent of single-pane glass walls must be completely replaced. Electric utilities, completely replaced. The plumbing, much of which is in the building slab, must be excavated and replaced. The HVAC, completely replaced. Kitchen facilities would have to be replaced too. So what's left? Not much. Perhaps the built brick corners and the cross beams. Most speculations about the current state of the building are addressed in the Public Works presentation. They are not positive. Understandably, the Preservation Commission values the history and the memory of the Civic Center. Understandably, the Preservation Commission would prefer adaptive reuse. Unfortunately, the message from the building is DNR. Do not resuscitate. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Just a reminder to state your name and where you're from.
Hi, Bruce Michelson. This will take 1 minute. Okay. I'm Vice Chair of the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Commission of the City of Urbana. I've taught cultural history for most of the past 40 years, and I believe strongly in knowing and conserving the past. My wife and I provide financial support for preservation of historic sites, including structures in Hartford, Connecticut, and Hannibal, Missouri. However, we understand the difference between buildings with architectural and historical significance and buildings that are merely outmoded and mediocre. To us, the Civic Center fits that description. It's never consistently met its purpose as a site of vitality and community connection. Its awkward design has been compared to rest stops along I-57. When it was open, it was not recognized as a structure of special interest, and its closing created no groundswell of regret. Its prospects as an environmentally sustainable asset are poor. Refurbishing and maintaining it now would constitute a financial burden with little to be gained. If there are solid reasons to make that investment, I would be in favor. But in my view, those reasons are simply not there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Just, and microphone, please.
Good evening. My name is Teresa Michelson. I live at 2013 Silver Court West in Urbana. My husband and I have lived in Urbana for almost 40 years, and for the last 20, I've been involved with the Southeast Urbana Neighborhood Association. I've also served on the City Development Commission for the City of Urbana. I understand that the CUMTD has a well-developed plan to create a new transportation center at the site where the Civic Center stands now. I know how much time and effort has been put into this project, and the benefits on such a fresh addition to downtown Urbana would go far to helping revitalize the downtown. I hope we can encourage and cooperate with the MTD to bring this plan to completion rather than encumber them with redesigning to accommodate the Civic Center. Essentially, the remains of a false experiment. I think you agree that the City of Urbana needs to balance history with innovation and to avoid burdening ourselves with public properties with no distinction other than their oddity and obsolescence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Diane Marlin. I served on the Urbana City Council from 2009 to 2017, and I served as mayor from 2017 to 2025. Thank you all for your service on this commission. I'm here tonight to ask you to vote against the request to landmark the Urbana Civic Center at 108 East Water Street. Over the past 20 years, probably more, I've had direct experience both with issues related to the operation and maintenance of the Civic Center facility. I've also participated in several different community attempts over the years to locate a bus transit center in downtown Urbana. And I can tell you the current collaboration between the City of Urbana and the Mass Transit District for use of the parcel at 108 East Water Street gets us closer than we've ever been to achieving that goal. I'm here to speak about the community impact of landmarking. Landmarking the Civic Center will effectively block, as we've heard, the MTD from submitting a grant for a transit center at that location. We've heard several times that it's not feasible to build a transit center around the Civic Center building or incorporate it into the new design. The Civic Center cannot be repurposed as a lobby, an atrium, or a plaza for the transfer center. There simply isn't enough room on that parcel for the vehicle circulation that's required for a modern and efficient transit center. And the thing that makes this incredibly important is that there are no other feasible sites available in downtown. And the words feasible and available are very important in this sentence. Again, over the past 20 years, multiple sites for a transit center have been considered. Some of you on this commission will remember the exercise we went through for putting a bus transit center at Lincoln Square. That didn't advance. Another more recent exercise involved looking at a site on the county jail site on Main Street, the entire block to be transformed into a government complex and a bus transit center incorporated into that. That didn't advance either. After we made the very, very difficult decision to close the Civic Center in light of the dire financial situation we were in, plus the absolute deteriorated condition of the center, and after it was closed, the conversations began to coalesce around the site on Water Street. And the city, the MTD, and potential community partners began to evaluate the possibilities of that site. Landmarking the Civic Center closes a lot of doors, and I think permanently, possibly. It represents a lost opportunity to provide, at long last, a clean, safe, and comfortable facility to serve the thousands of transit customers and drivers throughout the community. And I can't stress how important this is at this time. You probably know currently the parking deck at Broadway and Elm serves as our informal downtown bus transit point. It's woefully inadequate. I've been downtown. I used to be when I worked here in this building. I was downtown almost every day. Families, students, senior citizens, persons with mobility issues, everybody who has to transfer buses now has to wait outside when it's 100 degrees or 0 degrees, whether it's 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. around the parking deck. The only nearby public restrooms are in Lincoln Square. Sometimes people use the porta potty in the parking deck, and oftentimes not. Landmarking in the Civic Center also represents a lost opportunity to reduce the bus congestion surrounding the parking deck and courthouse. There were days when I'd count 8 or 10 buses idling or circling that facility. It represents a lost opportunity to provide a permanent and convenient location to the community for Urbana School District Central Administration and staff. And it represents a lost opportunity to meet transportation needs of residents, the businesses, and government services. It also represents an enormous loss of funding. Downtown construction investment of at least $32 million, which is the grant that the MTD is looking at today, $25.6 million in federal grant funds, $6.4 million in the local match. In addition, the MTD to date has spent over $133,000 for consultants to conduct the complicated multi-year National Environmental Policy Act review for the project that's required for projects like this, as well as over $30,000 for the demolition mitigation plan required by the state historic. I have one more paragraph. May I continue?
The chair can extend with a vote from the commission.
Does anybody
3 minutes.
have against that?
Thank you very much.
Please extend.
The demolition plan, the demolition mitigation plan ensures that the Civic Center will be memorialized in photos, blueprints, written history, physical description of the structure. These documents will be archived both at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield and in the Champaign County Historical Archives at the Urbana Free Library. And I'm convinced that there are ways to evoke and memorialize the Civic Center and some of its design in the new transit center that's built, much as the way the blueprints and photos from the Urbana Lincoln Hotel are now visible and on display at Hotel Royer. So I urge this body to prioritize the overall community benefit, and there are many other options for event and meeting spaces in our downtown, and they are present now. But in reality, there are no other options for the transit center that we so desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ron Laneker. I own the building on 210 North Broadway, so I'm right next door to the Civic Center. And also, just this background, I was a member of the Wisconsin Board of Historic Places. And
Yeah, the
You
mic
can't hear
seemed
me?
to be really low tonight also. Is that, maybe it's just me, but I don't know. Sorry, the microphones seem to be very low to me tonight. I mean,
Okay.
Usually it's no difficulty to hear people, but
is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I own the building next door, and I was on the Fond du Lac Historic Preservation Commission in Wisconsin for about 4 or 5 years, so I've been sitting in your place. I don't really have a position on whether it should be considered a historic property or not. However, I would like to see the property used in a proactive way. Since we bought the building in 2018, and since that time, the building has been empty. And from a standpoint of, I think, the biggest concern that I've seen when I was sitting in your shoes is you don't want to have something designated as a landmark that's going to end up encumbering the building later on, because you do have the issue of unintended consequences with that. That said, at the same time, it sounds like that there are some opportunities if the building is not designated. Those still have to come to fruition too. So I think, again, I wouldn't necessarily say whether the building is historic or not, other than it's in my backyard, and I would like to see the building put to some good use, however that is, and would just be careful of having an unintended consequence if for some reason it's stymieing what's going on afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
and thank you, Olivia, for fixing the sound. Yeah, much better. Thanks.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? My name is Brian Adams. I live at 907 West Daniel Street in Champaign. I'm a former resident of Urbana. I lived here for about 25 years before I moved to Champaign, and I was very active in historic preservation in the community, and try to continue to be active in historic preservation. And I'm here to strongly support the nomination for landmark status for the Civic Center. I recently volunteered for the mid-century modern tour that was conducted a little over a week ago in the community. I volunteered to help monitor one of the properties, and I was very impressed with the turnout. There were so many people interested in architecture from this period. Usually when I think of historic preservation, I think of buildings from the 1800s, early 1900s, but there really does seem to be interest amongst the community for architecture of this time, and the Civic Center does represent a very unique building that fits into this type of architecture. I took a look at the preservation website for the different type of landmarks that have been recognized in Urbana. There are 21 recognized historic landmarks in the city. These date to between 1850 and 1940, so there's nothing past 1940 on the list of historic landmarks in the community, nothing from the time period mid-century modern currently in the inventory of historic properties. And of those properties that are listed, most of them predate 1930. So there's really a gap between what we recognize as historically significant in our inventory here in Urbana and other historically significant architectural types, in this case the mid-century modern style. Also, most of the buildings that are currently on the local historic list are dwellings or residences. There's a church, there's a lodge and a theater, but there's really nothing that fits the classification of the Civic Center. So it's not only unique for its architecture, in my opinion, but also for its function. It's a very unique building. There is one other mid-century modern structure in town that has been recognized. That's the Lincoln Square Mall, but hasn't been landmarked as a local historic landmark. It's on the National Register. So I guess that would be another reason why I think it would be important to recognize the Civic Center as a local landmark to sort of bridge that gap there. So again, I strongly urge that you approve this nomination, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. Whoa, that is louder. I'm Susan Apple, and I chair the Advocacy Committee for the Preservation and Conservation Association of Champaign County, PACA. Naturally, PACA is in full support of this nomination. I think it's well put together. It covers a very rich history, even in the relatively short time that this building has been around compared to some. And I would like to remind you, as the Preservation Commission, that your concern here is whether the application for nomination or landmarking actually fits the criteria in front of you. Your staff itself has pointed out that it agrees that the building fits all 5 of the categories indicated. This is technically tonight not about the MTD. It is about whether this building deserves recognition for its value to the community's history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right? I have a little bit of cold, so I apologize for that. My name is Madison Bowman. I have lived in Urbana for about 4 years. I'm a little bit new to the area. First off, I would like to thank everybody here for providing information on the existing condition and criteria information. People are questioning what's left of the building rather than what it can do for the city of Urbana. I'm not saying adapting and or landmarking the Civic Center is a clean solution, but demolishing it represents a loss of education, cultural, and civic value, excuse me. I know I gotta speak louder. I have worked in forensic engineering and architecture. I have worked in historical preservation. I have worked on nominations. It's not easy. It requires a lot of work and effort, but I firmly believe this Urbana Civic Center is not just an architecture oddity, but also a chance at Urbana renewal. For me, in the new area, choosing between Champaign and Urbana, you can see that it's kind of hard to distinguish ourselves when you're trying to move apart Champaign, Urbana. Excuse me, there's not a lot in terms of landmark nominations, especially for mid-century modern in the 1940s, et cetera. So I firmly believe this nomination would do the area good, much rather than demolishing it and just plastering something on a wall as a recognition of history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Heather Grossman. I live on Ohio Street in Urbana. I've been a resident here for 12 years now. I'm also an architectural historian. I teach in the School of Architecture. here at U of I. And I also wanted to throw my support behind this nomination for many of the reasons that others have already spoken of, but also to think about the fact in particular, as has been raised already, that mid-century modern is something that is new to the idea of historic preservation. The 50-year threshold has always been sort of held. We have just passed the 50, or there's now just a bit past the 50-year threshold with this. And so I think one of the things that it's important for us all to remember in town is that the architecture of the mid-century has not generally been conceived of as something that is historically important. But we are very quickly progressing past the 50-year mark here with this building. And in town, there are many different buildings that have deep significance to the community, have architectural significance as a demonstration of what was being built in the United States and serving communities in the United States in the middle of the century and just after. And that these things are rapidly becoming part of our historical fabric, just as a building from the 1880s might have been, or from the 1850s might have been in a previous consideration and period. So coming back to what Ms. Appel just said about your sort of charge for the evening, it is very important to think about this building as an historic place that contains the memories of the people of Urbana, has potentiality to think about what Urbana was striving to do when it was built, which was to create a sort of civic core and identity for town. And that it can be something, again, in that vein. And so it can be something that could bring together innovation. And I am someone who is deeply, deeply engaged and loves having public transportation and things like that. So this is not to say don't move forward with the MTD plan. I think that's deeply needed in town. But perhaps where maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago there was an impossibility of using some of their site, we're in a different moment. And perhaps that can be reopened, renegotiated with other things. But the importance of these places is significant. And I also had participated in the Mid-Century Modern programs, not this year, but in the year past, the inaugural year. Tremendous interest. People came down from Chicago, from all of St. Louis, to come out and see these mid-century buildings. All over the country, mid-century buildings have been torn down in record numbers because they have not been seen as being something as part of an historical significance in architectural history. That is changing, and that is being turned over. The opinion about doing that is being turned over, and we are seeing more and more communities turn their attention to mid-century buildings and to trying to preserve them, because we realize that as time is progressing, that architecture is becoming the sort of physical record of our past and needs to be saved. So thank you very much for your consideration, and I hope you'll vote to landmark the building.
Thank you. Okay, not seeing anybody else rise. I think that ends our time for audience participation. And next on the list is continued public hearings. I don't think we have any continued public hearings. Same with old business. I don't think there's any unfinished business. And then that brings us to the public hearing that we know is happening here. So HP 2026 L01, a request by Phyllis Winters Williams to designate the Urbana Civic Center at 108 East Water Street as a local historic landmark as per Article 12 of the Urbana zoning ordinance.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you commissioners and members of the public. I'd like to open the staff presentation on Historic Preservation Case 2026-L-01. To introduce this case, staff received an application from Phyllis Williams to designate the Urbana Civic Center at 108 East Water Street. This application was reviewed by staff and deemed complete on April 27th, 2026, and will be heard at a public hearing within the required 60 days for historic preservation cases. The owner of City of Urbana Legal Division has not provided written consent or authorization for this nomination. However, the zoning ordinance and the historic preservation section zoning ordinance does not require owner approval for historic landmark nomination or designation. Lacking written consent for landmark designation, the Historic Preservation Commission shall recommend that the Urbana City Council approve or deny said application, and final designation powers lay with the Urbana City Council. Following the public hearing, the HPC should review all information presented to it that is pertinent to the nomination and make a recommendation to City Council to approve or deny said application. This power is granted to the city through Article 12 of the Urbana zoning ordinance, which grants the city authority to designate local landmarks and districts with the stated purpose of promoting the educational, cultural, economic, and general welfare of the community. Okay. Introduction to the location and description of the site. We have Water Street down here to the south. The Urbana Civic Center faces East Water Street and is a one-story modern structure with an irregular plan comprised of a main square primary volume with a rear wing. The rear wing in the back is not immediately discernible to the observer, and the building gives the overall impression of a square symmetrical plan building. Character-defining features identified in the application include the building's flat roof with 4 pyramidal cupolas, deep overhanging eaves, exposed mottled brick walls, large expanses of metal frame windows, and open interior spaces. Some background on the building. The Civic Center was originally intended as phase 1 of a 3-phase community-focused project that it would be extending north from Water Street. It was dedicated in 1970 as a modern civic gathering space and served as an affordable mid-sized public venue until its closure in December of 2018. Over its history, the facility housed a wide variety of organizations, events, public meetings, including art shows, family gatherings, political debates, educational functions, neighborhood and cultural gatherings and associations, weddings, and nonprofit fundraisers. The building is notable, therefore, for its longstanding role in the civic and social life of Urbana and the greater community. It is also a significant example of architectural modernism and its expression in the Midwest and Champaign-Urbana area. The building was designed by architects Delbert Smith, Scott Seaton, and Milan Olach of the firm Smith, Seaton, and Olach. At the time of the Civic Center's construction, these architects were part of a greater movement of local architects working in mid-century modern styles. The criteria for the Historic Preservation Commission to consider tonight in this landmarking recommendation are set out in section 12.5.c.1 of the Urbana zoning ordinance referencing landmarking criteria. The applicant has nominated the Civic Center as historic landmark under 5 of the 7 possible criteria for landmarking. These are A, C, D, E, and F. The first of these criteria is representative of significant value as part of the architectural, artistic, civic, cultural, economic, educational, ethnic, political, or social heritage of the nation, state, or community. The building reflects distinctive local and regional expressions of mid-century modern design. Its architecture and form represent a particular time in the history of the city of Urbana and the greater region, and its long-standing use as a secular, affordable community center and venue space has shaped the civic and social life of Urbana and the greater community memory. It holds a prominent place in community memory as well as within downtown. The next criteria under consideration is criteria C, as representative of the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type, inherently valuable for the study of a period, style, craftsmanship, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials, while retaining a high degree of integrity. The Civic Center reflects distinctive local and regional expressions of mid-century modern design, and it was opened in 1970, retaining a high degree of its original materials and character-defining features, such as stated, a flat roof with 4 pyramid-shaped skylight cupolas, overhanging eaves, large window expanses, and metal framed. The Civic Center has also been determined to be National Register eligible under criterion C which references structurally expressive modernist design. Our third criteria, criterion D, as notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area, or the notable work of a firm or group whose collective genius has influenced an area. The building, designed by Smith, Seaton, and Olak, architects were part of a greater local community of architects and designers working in the area, incorporating modernist tenets into their work. They fit into a broader collective of architects operating during this time that held significant influence over the built environment of Champaign and Urbana and the concentration of modernist structures in these cities and region. Criterion C, identifiable as an established and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its unique location or physical characteristics. The building's uniquely shaped cupolas are an identifiable feature in the downtown landscape of Urbana and act as a familiar visual feature, both physically and in the community's collective memory of the building's years of function as a community center and venue space. It holds the community's collective memory of events held there in downtown Urbana. Last criterion, criterion F, character is a particularly fine or unique example of a utilitarian structure, including but not limited to farmhouses, gas stations, or other commercial structures with a high level of integrity or architectural significance. The building has been determined by the State Historic Preservation Officer to be National Register eligible under criteria A and C of the National Register, which address the building's significance as a hub for community events and architecture. The architects who designed the building intended it to be practical, useful, and eye-appealing, and stated that the center will contain only the bare necessities because longevity, not cheapness of construction, is wanted. Their commitment to simple utility, design, and function fit within this criteria. The options presented to you before you today are to, 1, find that the nomination meets one or more of the criteria for designation for local landmarking, and recommend to the Urbana City Council that the property be designated. Or you may find that the nomination does not meet any of the criteria for designation and recommend that the City Council not designate the property as a local landmark. The Historic Preservation Commission staff recommends that they find that the landmark nomination conforms to criteria A, C, D, E, and F of section 12.5.c of the Urbana zoning ordinance and recommend that the property's designation to the City Council with the following findings of fact. The Civic Center was opened in 1970 and was designed by Smith, Seaton, and Olak within the context of regional modernist expression and holds significance due to its architecture, integrity, recognizability, and contributions to the civic and social history of the city of Urbana. The building meets 5 of the 7 criteria for the designation of a property as a local historic landmark. It meets items A, C, D, E, and F of the designation criteria. Okay, thank you. I believe now we will have the applicant join us. Yes, please.
I'm not sure the mic is on.
Oh, there we go. There it is. Now it is on. Okay. I'm not quite sure how you'd like me to proceed. Do you want me to just work through the application with you, or?
Please make your presentation as intended using the slides that you've provided.
Oh, okay. Well, I did put in some extra photos. I just keep doing my homework. And, oh, what do I have to do to make it go forward now? To where?
If you push the right advance key on the keyboard, sometimes the mouse is correlated, but sometimes
okay.
it's just on the keyboard.
Okay.
Is that working?
Okay, so just do that.
Use the scroll button.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, there we go. There he is. I love this photo of the Civic Center because here sits this modern pavilion in the shadow of the feed store. And that feed store had been there for a long time. Gosh, I feel like I'm shouting. Okay. Okay, press right, press scroll. I'm sorry. Oh, just try that one, okay? No, not that one. I'm sorry, I use an iPad at home. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, and so to show you the site, and I want to thank Dr. Brian Adams for letting me use some of his history of Urbana. Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so as you can see from this aerial view, so here's the Urbana Power and Light Company, and also that's where the city garage was. The feed store from the previous picture is marked, and it's just to the north. The courthouse, the Flatiron Building, this will all kind of orient you in downtown. Here's another photo from a little bit earlier, and what you can see here is that where you see the puff of smoke, can we point to it? The puff of smoke right here that's the smokestack from the Urbana Power and Light Company with all of the trains. Remember, this was the Big Four railroad yard, and so there was a lot of industrial activity up this way. It was really busy. This is the Urbana outlots. Water Street was the northern boundary of the original downtown. But then by the 50s, that had subsided. Now, even before the Civic Center, the old community center was torn down, there was talk of a new Civic Center. Of course, there were limitations to the old one. It looked like a little building alone and really needed more space. On some nights, there were 500 kids that were around the Civic Center. And, they couldn't all fit in at one time, but the parking lots were full too. What's interesting about this is that as they were having trouble getting funding and figuring out how to pay for this, at first it was going to be Champaign-Urbana Civic Center. And then Urbana dropped out, so it looked like it was going to be the Champaign Civic Center. Oh, horror. And then finally, things got straightened out. But this is 1958, as you can see. Let's go ahead and go forward. Okay. And thanks to one of the PACA members who found this in their cleaning of their desk and shared that with me. This is the old business card. Okay. Here's Oscar Adams. I included the picture of him as a football player, the Little Giant. And he was the overseer of the Tiger Den. He was athletic director, he was the coach, he was the driver's ed instructor. In fact, he got boys to take driver's ed and take it seriously because when they'd go for a drive around town, they could go by their girlfriend's house. I know that from experience. So here is, and I mentioned the Plaza building, which tended to, it obscured, it took the Civic Center out of public view. Here's the original bank, the Champaign County Bank, and here's the plaza that they built, the Money Palace, basically, which was finished in 1980, and by 1985, they weren't there. Okay, let's go. Here's the groundbreaking, and I wish that this is from the vertical file in the Historic Archives. So that's Stan Weaver, who's throwing the soil. Now, I think it's Virgil Wyckoff is the second man in a hat. The first man in a hat behind Mr. Weaver, I recognize him, but I can't place a name to him. And the young woman, I don't know either. Okay, yeah, thank you. So here's a construction picture. It almost looks like they were putting Legos together. Let's go ahead. And once again, here we are building in the shadow of Urbana's past. So it does kind of make you wonder, how did they come up with this? You know, here we are, it's the outlot, but wasn't this a radical idea? Okay, let's go ahead. So the Tiger Den, once the community building went away and was raised, pardon me, they had a hard time coming to the Civic Center, and in fact, it tended to fizzle. But there was probably signs of some fracturing before that. You know, we feel like sometimes the 50s went on into the 60s for a while, and then the 60s became the 60s. And here you'll see in the yearbook, instead of a bunch of smiling faces, and here's the Tiger Den Council, blah, blah, blah. And here it is, this year, Den Council attempted to please a large part of the student body by putting on dances for everyone's taste. And so obviously, this was a struggle. And in fact, soon after the Civic Center was built, the Tiger Den was no more. It was, they would try to, let's go ahead, please. Thank you. Okay, good. Okay, so that's the auxiliary photos. And then the photos I did put in with it, you know, you've got those in your packet. Okay. So, what would you like me to, where should I go next? So the Tiger Den originally was a thing of legend. It did look like a savings and loan, and it was busy all the time. When it wasn't busy with kids on the weekend, it was busy with any kind of club and wedding that you could imagine. What was amazing was then when we got the newspaper article you saw where they were trying to fundraise in '58, they consulted with 270 local organizations, 270 organizations to kind of gauge what kind of interest there would be in a civic center. And by the way, our old community center was totally taken apart and it was reconstructed. A man actually took it south, and I believe it's in Mississippi now. But it was totally taken apart, put together. But the whole block was raised for parking, and of course, the old city building would come down eventually. What I tell you in the nomination about its importance, it was $25 per quadrant and only $10 for nonprofit organizations, with prices slightly higher on the weekends due to the cost of custodial service. But you had tables, chairs, AV equipment, all that included. What a wonderful opportunity, and parking close by. As I point out, that's better than almost any place on campus. And so the list of renters does reflect that. I think it's important to note that Ruth Brookins announced her run for mayor from the Civic Center. And Tim Johnson, his bid for state representative, Terry Bruce, and then challenger Al Salvi debated. I enjoyed the fact that the area pastors protested the declaration of Gay Pride Day in the Twin Cities by Mayors McCollum and Markland. And of course, the Muslim Student Association hosted their Get Your Piece of Heaven banquet at the Civic Center. It was available for everyone. For Black congregations, for small congregations, for startup churches, the Civic Center was a viable opportunity, an affordable place where they could spread their wings. I quote from a newspaper, from a television article from 2018, commenting on the closing of the Civic Center. Let's see. If the Civic Center, Mayor Marlin had said at the time that if it closes, it could really affect mid-sized groups which need meeting space. People are going to have to get creative with where they hold their events. The Civic Center was a very popular place for pop-up art shows. Craft Guild had its annual sale there for years, and the Black Chamber of Commerce had used it for expos. The president of Visit Champaign said closing the Civic Center would be a loss for the community, but there are a lot of other places available for those who need space. A lot of women in the area are concerned about available wedding venues. Duluth says there's still plenty around town. People can check out labor union halls, the Legion halls, or Elks. Duluth says other venues, including the Urbana Park District's Phillips Rec Center and Boathouse and area warehouses, also might be available to rent. My emphasis on that, but I thought, area warehouses, what? So, for its importance to the civic engagement of our cities, and I do hope you read through my list of people that used it from the DI ads, because I think I did a pretty decent job and it reads like some pretty good jazz. For its association with architects, and I guess this borders on the why now. I volunteered for the first Mid-Century Modern tour, and then I got more involved with the second tour. And I can tell you that what an educational process. It's not lost on me that there is only one other modern building in the Twin Cities that's been landmarked, and that was the owner coming forward on that Atomic Ranch house in Champaign. This is it. And this is a unique place. And I think for too long, even PACA felt like if it wasn't swaddled in limestone and granite, if it didn't have a lot of gingerbreading and wasn't 3 stories tall, with a few turrets and gables, that it just didn't quite meet the criteria. It had to be older than this. The 50-year mark came at the beginning of the pandemic. And it also, and so, okay, here we are now in 2026. No harm, no foul. I feel like this is an important nomination. It's important the way we consider it, the way we learn to look at these modern structures. Erlanger House, for pity's sakes, ought to be a local landmark. It ought to be on the National Register. And Urbana is full of homes, but this as a civic building is unique among us. Although when you look at all of the other structures in town of this mid-continent modern style, this fits right in, but I still think it was a bold decision for the planners to make. I only wish I knew exactly what they cut out of the original design to get to this because of the money problem. I wish I knew more about Milan Olak, but I don't know very much, and I couldn't even find an obituary for him. Let's see. Well, I feel like I'm boring. I don't want to bore you, but I don't want to leave. I mean, what would you like me to do?
Phyllis, no, I don't believe you're boring any of us here. And,
Okay. Thank you.
and fortunately, we did receive this in advance, so
Yeah. and-
we do have a lot of the information, but the
Okay.
public may not.
Although,
I don't know if we have a certain time.
I do also want to just state for the record that we did hand out to the commissioners summary of procedures for public hearings. So if you saw people passing out paper, it's just the procedures for how a
Alright.
public hearing operates. The petitioner may outline the request and present evidence. So Phyllis is able to present evidence as she sees fit. At a certain point, we will move on to other proponents presenting evidence, and then opponents may also present evidence for the case, and then others may be heard.
okay.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, Phyllis.
Well, I feel like I've put everything that I could into the nomination. I mean, because everything's electronic, it's forever, and so I wanted to try to do a good job. Although I have questions that I'd love to have answered. At some point, I'd like to talk to people that were directly involved with the Tiger Den, because I think there's a whole story there to be told. But that's another day. So unless you had...
I think we might have questions, right? But did you have a quick
No,
one?
I have a point of clarification. If I understand correctly, so you've given a presentation about this, and thank you very much for the document, which was very substantial. I mean, it's a long work. If I understand correctly, the steps as they unfold are proponents and opponents presenting evidence, meaning not opinions about X and Y, but it's items that pertain to the nomination, like in support of this aspect of the nomination, I present the following fact or idea, and opposed would be, I don't believe it meets that criterion, for example, because of X or Y. Is that correct? So it's not just a continuation of, comment or opinions, but it's meant to, it says here evidence, right?
Correct. The Historic Preservation Commission bylaws do not define evidence as such in any sort of certain terms of what evidence may mean. The Board or Commission is not bound by strict rules of evidence. You may exclude material you find irrelevant, repetitive. There is mention of you may exclude irrelevant or repetitious material. I think it is up to your discretion as to what you would consider evidentiary for a public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Phyllis, if you have more, that's fine, but if there's other proponents who want to speak, and then if there's opponents, we can move. So let's move if there's other proponents first.
Thank you.
And then also,
And you might stay there unless you prefer to leave, because we will get to the point when we want to ask questions or discuss.
Sure.
Okay. I don't see any other proponents. Are there any other opponents that want to come up? Okay, also not seeing any opponents. So the next part is discussing the case as a commission before we move to a vote. So I've opened it up to the commission if anyone has any questions or comments they want to make.
Excuse me, Chair. I do think it would be appropriate for the petitioner to return to the audience to allow others to approach the table if they so would like to make a comment. And then if there are additional questions for the petitioner, you're welcome to ask those directly, and Ms. Williams can just walk up to the microphone that's available in the audience.
Okay. Does anybody want to begin? If not, I have some comments, but I can wait. Okay, well, I'll say some things first then, and as you gather your thoughts, if you want to step up, hopefully you can hear me all right. So we did have a couple of speakers during the public portion of commenting who reminded us of what our duties here are, and I just want to reiterate that, because what we're looking at and considering is based on findings of fact and looking at the various criteria that have been presented to us in this thorough packet that Phyllis has provided to us. There has been discussion for now several months regarding CUMTD and potential plans and potential grant application. Just keep in mind that these are separate issues, and I appreciated the email from Mr. Debovic in the audience who noted there was a meeting that just happened even just a few days ago from MTD's Board of Trustees, and there was discussion. And it's, in this packet, we have some minutes from that meeting, and it's concerning to me from those minutes that the landmark status of this building is so tied in with the decisions being made with MTD and their potential plans for this transfer station. They're two separate issues. I don't believe it's contingent on the landmark, and I would hope that CUMTD, as they have been such a great partner here in the city, would be willing to come to the table in the sense of better understanding how we can work together, because I'm certainly not here to say that I'm, against any forward movement, especially for what we need. I ride the bus frequently myself. I have waited in that parking garage in all types of weather myself. So yes, certainly, I am for MTD being able to use whatever space is feasible. That being said, though, the landmark of this historic structure is not tied to a transfer station as much as it seems to be reiterated in these meetings that we've had. They're two separate issues, and our only decision here is based on the landmark of a building. It's not, and the historic significance, it's not based on decisions related to a developer. I also wanted to highlight what Mr. Adams brought up, because I didn't have time to look it up myself, but I was curious about those 21 buildings that Mr. Adams brought up and how there aren't any mid-century modern buildings that have been nominated or landmarked locally. And I really do see this, where we are today, representing the beginning of what is to come. We do have other mid-century modern houses in the area that have not come in for nominations yet. But us sitting here today in this decision could impact what we receive in the future regarding these buildings. This is a big change that a lot of cities are coming about with, that, this is different. This is a different type of architecture that even we as a commission have dealt with. And it's just something to keep in mind that whereas maybe it's been ignored, or maybe it just wasn't quite there yet as far as historic significance, but things have changed, times have changed. And so as we look at the criteria, just keep in mind, this is a different type of building than what we've considered in the past, but it doesn't mean that it's less historic or less meeting these criteria than other buildings that we've considered. That's all I have to say right now. If anybody else wants to comment or ask questions.
Maybe I'll jump in next, and as a response to that, as everyone was talking, I was jotting down some notes, some thoughts, because some of the things that were said I've heard before. I read your emails, and some of the things were new to me in a way as kind of viewpoints. The first thing I want to say is I appreciate that everyone in this room cares about the city of Urbana. It's a really meaningful thing to me. I believe that. And I also think everybody cares about civic culture here, and I think everybody cares about transportation. I drive so infrequently that most of my students over the last 25 years don't even know I know how to drive. I take the bus and I bike. It's great. We are so fortunate for many reasons. So a moment ago, Angela, you said these are completely separate matters. And technically, yes, we're voting on this nomination period. But I have to give a little bit of context to how I'm approaching this question. So to begin, I'm sensitive to false oppositions. And I'm sensitive to how these get constructed and then can become very expensive. So in this case, we have the sense of historic preservation versus transportation, right? The possible of, I would even call it equitable transportation. It's been underscored a lot that this affects lower income people, in part because they're more likely to use the bus. I'm sensitive to this, the way that the false opposition between historic preservation and education in the city of Champaign led to the demolition of a, quote, mansion that in fact had been an apartment building, a lower priced apartment building for more time of its life than it was a private residence, when in fact, so they cost a lot of money to demolish for asbestos abatement and demolition, when in fact they could have made money because the building, the arrangement was to move the building 1 block to the east onto West Side Park. And an even better idea was to leave it exactly where it was and to use it as a vocational educational center. And that was an idea proposed by the students. So it took a long time to understand. People would say, they would shout at people who were trying to save the building, I believe in education. And many of the people they were shouting at were educators. So there's a false opposition that gets constructed here, right? And I'm also sensitive to differences in understanding. So one thing I'm hearing from some people is historic preservation is a kind of freezing of conditions that some people find precious, like singularities. And I totally understand. I mean, even as people are giving testimonies, I understand how that could be what you hear. That isn't the way I think about it. I certainly know people who have thought of it that way. I can think of many cases where it's played out that way. But historic preservation has evolved a lot, not just in the last 10 years, but in the last 50 years. And the principal way to think of historic preservation right now is it is a form of adaptive reuse. It's about taking stock of the assets that we've inherited and then making decisions about how to move some of this forward in ways that are to our advantage. So historic preservation as a form of adaptive reuse is in fact about win-win situations. It's a progressive position. It isn't an ossification or a freezing of something precious at the exclusion. If you think that it is, then it's easy to see it as oppositionally. I care about transportation, therefore I'm against preserving this building. I care about education, therefore I can't imagine why we would save this house. So I invite everyone to settle into the idea that actually what we're advocating for in historic preservation is looking at what we've inherited and saying, wow, that's worth saving. That doesn't need to be saved. So I'm very sensitive also to the fact that in this situation, we have a false opposition, I believe, based on differences in understanding. And so one of those that is being constructed in this memo that we got is if City Council votes in favor, if we vote and then City Council approves it, meaning it gets a designation, then suddenly this thing is frozen, transportation is shut down. I believe that many sites were considered, Mayor Marlin. I value your reporting. One of the things I didn't know was some of the things that you mentioned there, that they did consider this site. I think that's really important. I think that a great place for this happens to be this site. I also think that this building is worth preserving. And I know that what I really am finding kind of disturbing about this memo is the way it constructs a false opposition. It's taking advantage of this. If you look at what it's saying, well, first of all, to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing in the 2026 US DOT build program that says if you include an adaptive reuse component, the application is null and void. You're not eligible for the grant. And in fact, this memo admits as much when it says that the MTD will not submit a grant application for the project to avoid the risk of receiving an award that can't be used for its intended purpose. In other words, if it got landmark status and they put in an application, they could get the grant, but they wouldn't accept the grant. Why wouldn't they accept the grant? And what we've heard over and over is, well, because on that site a bus couldn't go around. And because there isn't enough of a turning radius. I was on the site the other day. There's a lot more room there than I thought. Students did a study, and they showed that a turning radius is completely possible given the buses. They were working with MTD when they were making that plan. And one of the keys there is you have an even more comfortable margin if you just demolish the kitchen annex. Well, demolishing the kitchen annex is no problem. I don't think anybody on this commission would object to demolishing the kitchen annex. I mean, no problem on that building. So there's a win-win potential here that because of false oppositions, because of that sense that historic preservation means you have to restore the curtains and the railings, and if you have to restore 90% of the building, the best approach is to demolish the whole thing and restore it with a new building that's going to be very expensive. I mean, I understand the costs, but there's just a logic here that is where people keep stumbling over things that are based on these false oppositions and these differences in understanding. And so no one has yet to convince me on this site that you couldn't actually have a terrific building right next door to it. I've seen schematic drawings. Mrs. Michelson, you had said in your remarks that MTD has very well-developed plans. According to MTD, they don't have well-developed plans. That's what they've stated to us. Ashley McLaughlin stated in this room, we don't have well-developed plans. So it's interesting to think about, what do they have? What do they know? What we know is that there's plenty of room to have a turning radius there if you tear down the kitchen, especially if you tear down the kitchen. So there's a win-win opportunity here, but because of false oppositions, people are saying it's one way or the other. If you have to tear down the building to get this center there, and that's completely untrue. But I would love for somebody to, I'm a reasonable person. I'm progressively minded. I know sometimes things have to be torn down, but I don't like tearing down something that has value. I don't like throwing out assets. I'm conservative in this regard. I don't set fire to money. I'm fiscally, I'm a penny pincher with my own money, right? So I would love for somebody to explain to me why this has to happen. And the line in here that's really just very depressing, another one in this MTD memo, is when it says that what it's saying is that you need to pass this resolution in order to assure us that you will support this project financially in your own scale. And they're also admitting it could be nominated and they could get the grant, but they would turn it down, and I think that's because of this claim about the turning radius. But it says that failure to pass resolution number 2026-11 gives the district's grant application a disadvantage. A disadvantage. What's the disadvantage? Their grant application. They say our grant application would be disadvantaged as there is no better way to signify commitment of support and local funds. If the city just said, we would love to continue our commitment to this, especially if there's a way to keep the Civic Center alive, some part of it, to move some portion of it. It doesn't have to be a Civic Center. It can be anything. It can be a waiting area for the transit center. It doesn't have to have the same curtains. It doesn't have to have the same railings. It doesn't have to have the kitchen. It doesn't have to have the kitchen at all. So nobody has yet convinced me that it is reasonable to spend a lot of money to demolish an asset that has huge adaptive reuse building potential that I happen to think, having just been in there, is in remarkably good condition, actually. I mean, all things considered, it's stunning how good the condition of this building is. And a document that's admitting that they could get this grant to begin with, even if it is. So if that doesn't make sense to anybody, I'd be happy to discuss it, you know, at whatever length works for you. But yeah, that's just. I'm sorry. I know that was long, but I want to say one other thing, which has to do with some of the logics. I really appreciate that in Kate Holliday's email, which there was a lot in there that I appreciated. I had not seen this; it wasn't sent to me. The library, aquatic center, and park structures also do not turn a profit or pay for themselves. They're provided by the city as needed public good. And I was thinking about that very idea earlier today at my desk when I was thinking for the Civic Center, people tracked what are the operating expenses for this building and what was being lost, and it was $40,000 to $50,000, we know. And at a time when, you know, the city was in economic crisis, and I don't envy any of you for having been at the helm, having to deal with that. But my question was, well, and how much was the city building losing? And how much was the fire station losing? And how much was the library losing? Because when you look at it, $40,000 to $50,000 for a building with the level of use it was getting was, I mean, it might have been the most, quote, profitable, the least losing building in the city's portfolio. But nobody said, well, let's tear down the fire station because they value the service provided. Nobody said tear down this building. This building isn't generating income to the best of my knowledge. It's probably losing a lot, its operating expenses, but nobody said tear it down. So this might have been the most, you know, the least losingest asset in the portfolio. So the real issue isn't the fact that it was losing money, because every building's losing money. The question is it worth investing in Civic Center? You wouldn't think about tearing down the fire station because you value the service. You wouldn't think about tearing down this building because you value the service. So the real issue is that people didn't value or weren't valuing its importance as a civic resource. And we've heard a lot, despite one of the things that was said, that somebody said that it was not, it was sort of never successful. I mean, it wasn't interesting architecturally and it was never successful. The testimony that we heard was that it was hugely successful. If you wanted to have an event there on a Friday or Saturday, you had to reserve around a year in advance. That's pretty successful. And during all of the remaining operating hours, it was rented approximately 50% of the time. That's pretty darn successful. Sorry, I'm done. Thank you.
Can staff offer clarification?
Go ahead.
Thank you. In terms of the disadvantage to the application, because the memo was like internal from MTD staff to MTD's board, it was asking for permission to apply for the funds. So that was referring to if MTD's board did not authorize that, they would have been at a disadvantage just in terms of how the grant application worked. It wasn't in reference to this site specifically.
Well, and also I can add some context because when I listened to the MTD's Board of Trustee meeting the other day, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he did bring up that he's had several people from the public come to him and ask, why can't you just continue the grant even if the building is landmarked? And his response was, and I'm paraphrasing here, but his response was that MTD in the past has been successful with submitting federal grants. And while they could say, for some reason they can't do it and it would probably be okay, that would not look good, understandably. But there is a fear that if they were able to receive that federal grant and not be able to execute, that is what is that's where this hesitation or this really the strong statement, I should say, saying that they will not submit the grant. It seems, based on the comment from this meeting, that there is fear that an entity, perhaps the city, perhaps this commission, would block their plans for that site. And in thinking about that statement, if this landmark happens and it goes to certificate of appropriateness, which would be what they would be applying for as the next phase, I guess their concern is they would be blocked for whatever they want to put forth. And we don't, and as David brought up, we don't know what that is. We have been told actually multiple times that there haven't been any plans yet. The most that I've seen is that there's mention of a vision, there's mention of 3 stories, but we don't have anything else to go off of what the plan is. But, I would appeal to CUMTD, to the Board of Trustees, that, again, like, we're not here to freeze these plans. We're here to help our community, the city, achieve the goals, even as we have in Imagine Urbana, the plan. Multiple times it's mentioned about the need for civic space, the need for preserving these historic downtown properties. And so I'm not sure how linked CUMTD is with what the city, what the community wants, but Urbana is different. Someone else brought it up. Urbana is different from Champaign. I chose to live in Urbana. I've lived here 15 years, thereabouts. I chose Urbana because it's unique to me, very different from Champaign. I don't know, I'm digressing. I want somebody else to talk here.
Well, this is a pretty interesting conversation here. So we all were able to take a walk through the building with staff, one by one. I was actually kind of expecting to go with a partner, but they divided us up into individuals according to the schedule that I was given. And so I went and walked through the building to observe it, which is a little ironic because, of course, I'm very interested of what the inside of the building looks like. I haven't been in it in quite a few years, but really just before the building was closed, I participated in 2 different programs which were real important to me, particularly called a celebration of a Day of Gratitude, in which we had representatives of 5 different spiritual faiths talk about what gratitude meant to them in a community meeting which celebrated the work and the appreciation of this kind of attempt in harmony within the community, because we were able to see how the similarities of spiritual faiths matched and coalesced with each other. And we celebrated the achievements of some young people who were growing personally and through their efforts with the Lincoln Challenge program and et cetera. So that was just one of the events that was occurring there. Heck, during the years I've been to the party of the Public Works Department, community birthday parties. There were, potluck dinners served at the community center. So I have a strong sense of its utility within the community as far as its service to it. But we're, of course, we're sort of celebrating its uses. That's one of the criteria, that it's an important community center. It has cultural significance. But we're also celebrating, it looks like a very interesting representation of the mid-century modern style, which is a style that I have only slowly come into be interested in. mostly through my partner, Ilona Matkovsky, who's a very great fan of mid-century modern, and I find that my house is filled now with furniture that was relating to that era. So what I always thought about approaching the building was, gee, those are kind of perky little peaks on the roof. I kind of like them. They were unusual, and they look kind of perky to me, and I like them. Very significant and different. And it was low slung, and it had like a big eaves on it, and it looked very modern. And when you went inside, it didn't function completely well because it had these movable partitions that divided up the rooms, and they were difficult. They were all very clever, and they worked well, but they were cumbersome to put together. And the speaker system was a little bit off and loud, and it kind of reverberated. But so when you had a dance there, it was pretty noisy. But when we went through, staff was constantly thinking about, oh, well, look at these curtains are just really old. They don't look good. They're going to have to be replaced. And then the kitchen was no longer serviceable. It wasn't a modern kitchen. But I'm thinking, well, if the MTD was going to use it, they wouldn't have a kitchen in this building. This would be, what they would want is a bathroom. It would be a public reception area for their buses, which it would certainly do very well to do. It's very commodious for that. And actually, the interior is rather handsome. It's very sparse. It's very, I would call Scandinavian in a kind of style, and very functional. So then I was looking at the property itself. It wasn't part of the tour that we would look on the outside. We were just looking at the inside. We were looking at all the faults that the electrical system would have to be replaced. Well, yeah, it was 50 years old, and you would bring it up to code, right? And that the lights were actually all they worked, but it was on an old system. And the plumbing would be a question. Well, you'd kind of have to fix the plumbing. If you wouldn't have bathrooms that didn't work, if it was going to be a bathroom in that building. So anyway, then I went out to the outside and I was looking around. And I saw that there was an empty bus parked right in front of the building when I went there. And it took up a parking space along the road. The bus wasn't so wide that it stuck farther than a regular car's parking space. In other words, a bus fit one lane. So I'm looking, and I go to the back of the building, and I see that the space between the property, well, not even the end of the property, but like the vegetation that was sort of shielding it from H Mart and to the north, and the back of the kitchen, which we've considered that whether it was even necessary to keep. I think there's like there's 2 full lanes, so that's 4 parking depths, the depths for four lanes of cars to the west. So that's part of the building's property. And then to the east, there were 5 lanes of parking. And the parking to the east, the property goes all the way to the back of Sherman-Williams paint store. And so I was looking at it, and I saw the outline of H Mart. H Mart is the property to the back, to the north of the building. And the entire building, the depth of H Mart, was actually a little shorter than the parking area, which is part of the property to be developed if you wanted to have something to be built there on the property, but still keep the community center as a entry port or a bathroom facility and shelter for people to sit. So if you can think of how deep H Mart is, that would be probably gives you a sense of how large a building could be built on that property. It wouldn't be as wide as H Mart, but it would be narrower. But if it was 3 stories tall, you'd get a lot of use out of that building. And you would still have the whole eastern side for buses to pull in and move out or whatever. So I just couldn't see the detriment, how this would be an impediment to considering some kind of construction for a new building adjacent to this one or connected to it by a bridge or a passageway or something, that couldn't support the dream that the MTD would have. And of course, the MTD has never shown us or provided to the public any concept plan that they might have of a building. I guess they haven't purchased the property yet, and they apparently haven't hired an architect. So they're really far, far from even creating or forming the concept of how they would use this building. And which is unusual, because a lot of times people, developers, when they come before the Plan Commission, they've already got the design and they have, the imagery of the building clearly set up. But so anyways, it's very fluid. And then I'm thinking that Professor Altschuler had his whole class do a series of projects a semester or two ago on conceptualization of how this property might be used using this building. And they came up with these wild and interesting formulations of how the building could be used. Very creative. And I think that the MTD might want to refer to some of these ideas in its conceptualization of what a building could be. But we're really not here to solve the MTD's issues. We have to look at the building and evaluate it for our own use and perspective, because we're the Historic Preservation Commission. It's sort of our job. You gave us this job, we're appointed, or we're not elected, we're appointed, but we are to advise the community about whether something actually has some value. I have a lot of opinions about what's valuable in this community, which I find hardly anybody believes in or agrees to, but I do have these strong values. So, I think that Phyllis made a very strong, very thorough, and very human presentation, and all these features about the people that were involved in the building, it just is very personalized. And of course, my experience working with the Day of Gratitude was a very personal experience in that building too. So the long short of it is that I support, so far I can't really I can't find a way of nixing the whole project just because there might be some question about how the property might get used in the future, because I know that that'll be solved. Creative minds will solve problems. So thanks for your time listening to me. I'm sorry it took so long.
I've been trying to pay attention to the nomination and the criteria we're going to be basing our decision on whether to landmark the property, the Civic Center on, and not about potential future developments, and not about whether the city ought to continue to have it function as a meeting center. I worked downtown Urbana for 20 years, and for a while I parked in one of the rented parking spaces at the Civic Center. I've been to, there was an annual Christmas party. Someone rented it and had a party there. I went to that many times and enjoyed myself. I've been to part of the Sweet Corn Festival, was run out of there, and a dinner once or twice or three times, and some other meetings. And I've been in the building a fair amount in the almost 50 years I've lived in Urbana. Did the Civic Center shape the civic life of Urbana? I can't convince myself that it did. That's one of the criteria. Is it inherently valuable for the study of the period it was constructed in? I have some sympathy for that one, but not a strong one. The architects, I knew Delbert Smith very well. I wasn't familiar with the other two at all. But was their individual genius reflected in the design of the Civic Center. I'm not feeling that. Is it an established visual feature and because of its unique location? I kind of always felt that it was lost in the back of downtown Urbana and not a central feature of Urbana, and it wasn't for me. And, but other people could feel differently. And is it a fine and unique example of a utilitarian structure? Unique? Fine. I don't know. I never had anything against the Civic Center, but I was never in love with it. Was it a hub for the community events? There were many community events there, and it was a great thing that it was reasonably priced and fairly large, but a hub, I just don't see it that way. And because of all my doubts, and I don't think I'm going to support the nomination. And I think I've explained why. So that's my thoughts on the deal.
So I guess I'm last. When I was looking at this, it was basically not what it could potentially be used for, just looking at what is our job? Our job is to see, does it meet all these criteria? And to me, it does meet at least the one of, it is an example of mid-century modern. It's a good example of that. It shows purity of materials being used, that it's stripped down. It's not meant to be ornamental. It's meant to be very functional. So to me, it does meet at least one. Some of the others, like, I don't know if it's a significant architect just because I haven't heard of them or know of them. But to me, it meets at least one, so I would support it.
Staff is going to bring up the recommendation slide that's typically prepared at the end of staff presentations for the commission's reference.
We have another comment from the commission, though.
Just a follow-up. We do disagree on a number of points because I do think that it meets more criteria. I mean, I say this from the perspective of somebody who's heard a lot of stories about its use, and the range of uses to which this space was put during its open time, as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the most diverse, and I would say interesting, eclectic and interesting. And for me, the cultural significance comes from that. It's amazing that Ed Asner, was there. But it's amazing that one of the city council members mentioned her brother had his wedding there. And people said that they did a lot there because they could afford it. So I think that the fact that the community at significant expense invested in a space like that as a site of social activity, artistic display, civic well-being, I think it does meet that criteria. Also, as somebody who's trained as a landscape and architectural historian and as an architect, I think this is a phenomenally interesting example of I mean this at national scale, of a civic building for this kind of activity. So it's true that the architects, we don't know who they were, but what we do know is having looked really closely at the building the other day and having studied, other drawings, these designers were excellent, and they were being mentored by people who were really, really important. So unmentioned in the report, it's very clear to me that these people got over to Bruce Goff's Garvey House on Burleson. It has 4 rectangular, or rectilinear renderings of the central circular space there. They clearly were influenced by that cap. But Dick Williams, we were lucky to have some great architects in this region, and these people clearly knew their work, studied with them, were influenced by them. But I want to give an example of also why, in addition to that, I'm not parsing this as we're tasked with doing one thing alone. That is our job. I think it's really important to articulate the fact that this is significant. Oh, I should say, and not to mention that the State Historic Preservation Office has said, oh yeah, this is worth nomination, right? City staff has said this as well. So I respect that. But there's one more logical slip here that in what was presented otherwise. For example, MTD prides itself on reducing greenhouse gases, right? We know that. It's broadcast widely. In architectural terms, there's no better way to do that than adaptive reuse. So to make an argument that you're respecting the environment, you value greenhouse gases, by tearing down an asset to put up a new building, that's a modern way of thinking, where demolition followed by new construction is seen as a form of progress. In our day and age, that is actually seen as primitive. That is seen as wildly irresponsible. And so as I think about that, given the context, including an adaptive reuse component is an ideal way to get a federal grant that the MTD does not yet have. They don't have this grant. They haven't submitted the application. But if they mention in there, we're going to take advantage of this space and by incorporating it as a lobby, as a restaurant, as the waiting area, anything. It doesn't have to be a wildly new use. The most interesting use for this is as a civic center. The second most interesting use for it is as, say, a lobby, which apparently is what it was intended to be to begin with. So its future isn't about it being some carnival-esque amphitheater of occasional avant-garde cinema. It's just, and so the point is that if they put into their application, we have a landmarked building, and that will help them get a grant, to be frank. And this is why I'm saying win, win, win. I'm not putting these things in opposition. I know what my job is to do, but I'm saying part of my thinking here is I would vote for this regardless, but I feel comfortable voting for it because when you have an asset that is as open and flexible as this one, it's ready-made for a new use like this. It's not a historic house that doesn't fit the agenda. It's so close to the actual agenda already that it's ridiculous not to see that. You want a lobby for your building? Guess what? We have a lobby right here. And so when you can add to that it meets these criteria of civic significance, architectural significance as a great example of regional, mid-century modern architecture as a space that was culturally significant. One way we know it's culturally significant is that we heard it in a presentation at the city council meeting, the one that I attended to speak on behalf of the Historic Preservation Commission. This was used right up to the moment it was closed. And if it didn't close, it would have continued to be used. If it were reopened as a civic center, it would be used. So therefore, this is not didn't really make it. This was a much loved, heavily used, highly eclectic building that's architecturally interesting. So I'm voting in favor for those reasons. But I also recognize that there's such a great opportunity here to parlay this. If they want to get a grant, they're more likely to get one if they do that. That's speaking from experience.
Thank you, David. And you really just ended it there, but there was one other point that I wanted to bring up because there's been a lot of talk related to nostalgia that has come up. And there's a difference between nostalgia as an individual may see it and the collective memory of a community. And what I appreciated with the nomination packet is I actually disagree with you. I don't think it was totally personal to Phyllis. What I really appreciated was all of the diversity that was brought forth of the utilization of that civic center. And that's incredibly important when we're talking about a community's collective memory. And that is very different than nostalgia of an individual. And there wasn't nostalgic individual, Phyllis has these memories. No, the nomination as it stands is talking about the collective memory of Urbana. And maybe Mr. Adams can tell us, but those buildings that are local landmarks right now, how many of those are homes? How many of those have civic use or had civic use? This is a very different nomination than we've received in the past. And so that's something also to just keep in mind as we go to this next step. Okay, so not seeing any other comments. Kate, did you want to give us instructions on the next part?
I would like to clarify that your motion will, you are recommending, either recommending or not recommending that the Urbana City Council designate this property. There is no capability to move to designate from this body itself. That power is with the City Council. Your decision, your recommendation will be transmitted to City Council, which will then be heard at City Council meetings in the upcoming weeks. So your motion should be structured around a recommendation to City Council, and it should include a finding of fact.
Thank you, Kate. So again, back to the finding of fact, that has to do with the criteria that have been outlined to us, as Kate described them previously. And so I would ask for a motion and then for us to create that motion. So is there a motion to recommend whether this nomination meets one or more of the criteria for designation as a local landmark, and recommend to the Urbana City Council that the Civic Center be designated as a local landmark?
I would be happy to move that the Historic Preservation Commission recommend to Urbana City Council to designate the property as a local local landmark, conforming with criteria A, C, D, E, and F.
And I would second that motion. It could be elaborated, but we don't have to. That's significant enough, I think.
Do you want me to articulate the specific?
Well, there's quite a
Categories?
few of them. I don't know if we
Criteria?
need to.
Excuse
but
me,
it might
point of
be.
order. The motion needs to be seconded, and then you can discuss the motion as presented on the floor.
And that's what I'm doing. I'm seconding it.
Okay, thank you.
But actually, a point of clarification, but there was he seconded, but then he also said it could be elaborated. And so my question is, do I
I know
need-
that's why it got complicated.
Okay.
So just a clean second, and then you can discuss the motion as presented on the floor.
Okay, so now I want to ask for a point of clarification. Should I re-articulate based, instead of saying A, B, or A, C, D, E, and F, should I have spoken out what the specific terms are? Okay, thank
Nope,
you.
that's sufficient, and
Thank
you're
you.
welcome to speak to the intent behind your motion.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, well, I mean, I can say, for the reasons mentioned earlier in my remarks, I believe that this meets the criteria. We're asked to assess according to these criteria. I believe strongly that it does. I think that this is well argued, well composed, and I also think that it's, because this is a recommendation to the City Commission, I strongly encourage the members of the commission to consider this, but also to consider the larger context, the incredible opportunity to basically recognize that a false opposition has been constructed based on differences in understanding. I think that there is a win-win situation here, opportunity here, that does in fact hang on recognition of this as in this way.
And just a question for staff. Should we give these votes individually, or are we asking for a collective motion, collective vote?
Individually. The recording secretary will call roll.
I've got a question. So I would just ask, we're going to be taking a vote, and I would ask that that the conversation that we had concerning the appropriateness of this decision be considered carefully by the body which we're forwarding it to, the Urbana City Council, because we're not going to be able to have the same conversation in front of them during their meeting as we've had here. But I think it's a very informative discussion, which I hope will guide them in the future, that just because the HPC decides that this is a landmark doesn't mean that all hope for working to involve the bus facility and the community at large to move forward, because we all want to see progress, and we want to see construction downtown, and we want to see adaptive reuse. We want to see buildings that haven't been opened or used for a while to be reborn and have new life. And so we're voting not to stymie something, but to urge it on with clarity, with foresight, with creativity, and to benefit the community.
Okay. So we have a motion, we have a second motion. I believe we're ready to recommend approval based on votes. Terry, are you able to call roll for the yes in favor of the recommendation to approve, or to send up to the city council to approve, or no?
Mr. Roberts,
I vote yes, I approve it.
Mr. Shepherd,
No?
Ms. Urban,
Yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes?
and Ms. O'Donnell.
Yes.
That's it.
Thank you, Terry. So majority approves the recommendation to the city council to approve the landmark status of the Urbanic Civic Center. Gotta get my place back here. So the next item of business is actually new business. I don't believe we have any new business.
Correct, no new business.
Okay, next is monitoring of current historic properties. Is there any monitoring to report from commission members on our existing historic properties? Okay. Staff report?
Do you have a brief staff report to give? There was a staff report paper included in your packet, as well as for the public. The National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, the NAPC email list, your city emails have all been added to the membership list that the director of the NAPC holds, so you should start to receive monthly or more frequent emails regarding webinars. The NAPC tries to hold monthly webinars that do qualify for a variety of continuing education credits for various organizations. They also do qualify for CLG continuing education, which we do have to report to maintain our CLG status with the state. It's a bit confusing if you've not done a webinar before. They will send out one email at the beginning of the month saying, hey, this webinar is going to happen. Here's the coupon code if you're a member. Then a couple weeks later, it will come out saying register for the webinar, use your coupon code from 2 weeks ago to get the webinar for free. I don't know why they do it like that. That's how they do it. If you do attend the webinar, please save your certificate of completion. They will send that out another few weeks later to send to me so we can store those and report them to the state at the end of the year for our continuing education credit reporting. Also, a note about the July study session. Based on motions from the last Historic Preservation Commission in May, we will hold one study session today for the introduction to the Historic Preservation Plan, but the July first study session will be bylaws review and Section 106 bylaws revisions. In this study session, staff will present you with draft additions and revisions regarding the Section 106 process, so you will have actual text to look at and edit or comment on about how the Section 106 process might be added to the bylaws. And then because you all have been in City of Urbana longer than staff has, we ask that if you have other things that you have concerns, comments, additions, changes to the bylaws, be thinking about those to either email to staff beforehand or present in the study session itself on July 1st. And that is the conclusion of my staff report.
I got a question.
Yeah.
For Kate. So I participated in one of, I think it was one of these teaching sessions. It was about preservation of facades that have ceramic, and no, not ceramic, it was cement or something like that, decorations. And I got a certificate, but I'm not like a academic person. I'm not a staff person, so the certificate doesn't mean anything to me in particular. But does it mean something to you?
It does. So for our certified local government requirements, and that's a program also for the audience's knowledge as well, the certified local government program through the state of Illinois, through the State Historic Preservation Office, certifies that certain communities and commissions within the state of Illinois are held to a higher professional standards, and they are expertise within the field of historic preservation commissions within the state. So the Certified Local Government Program, or CLG program, we are required to do reporting for that. So we report to the state things like how many COAs we issued, how many landmarks there are, if there were any new landmarks designated, if there were any properties nominated to the National Register. One of those reporting categories is commissioner training, commissioner continuing education. And there's a certain, I don't know the number off the top of my head currently, but there are a certain number of hours that we are required to do as a CLG to maintain that CLG status. And so if you attend a training that qualifies, it sounds like Mr. Roberts, that would qualify. Would have to double check on that. You're welcome to send me your information or proof that you did this, and I can add it to a folder to be reported on to the state.
Well, I hope I catch that, and I'll find out.
Sure, thank you.
Dennis, in the past, they've emailed me the certificate, so
Did me too, but
it may be sitting as an attachment somewhere.
I looked at it, but I didn't know what to do with it, so.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Next on the list is for the study session, which is on the outdated historic preservation plan that is from 1998. I think we can actually keep this pretty brief. I mean, you're welcome to come up there, but because we have talked about this before, and really the intent with adding this to the study session is just to keep it on our radar, because now it has been almost 2 years, but when we spoke to, I can't remember his last name at the moment, John something, at SHPO, he stated that we could apply a CLG grant to potentially get support with a historic preservation plan update. So that is still something that I know I'm very interested in. I hope others are still very interested in that. And the timeline, I believe, for that would be like September, October, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and I echoing your point that this is going to be very brief, because I know it's already 9 p.m., and this is intended to be an introduction of a much longer process. John Presley is the CLG coordinator for the State Historic Preservation Office. It is my understanding as well that we could apply for a CLG grant for a historic preservation plan. I will, I think for the sake of continuing this conversation in a productive way, I think we're a bit away from that. I'm not sure at the moment that we are prepared yet to put together a grant application in a meaningful way. I think we have to start this process first. We are also finishing up the current CLG grant that we have applied for that will close out in June of 2027. So that CLG grant should be finished, closed out. I think in terms of just the steps of what work has to happen, we are trying to get our surveys in order. So what do we have in terms of historic resource surveys? What do we need to then adjust, and how do we target new surveys? What do we care about in our historic preservation plan? I'm not sure we have enough time between now and when those grant applications will be due to nail down a specific enough grant application for us to benefit from it. Does that make sense?
Well, and sure, if like we're not allowed to have more than one at the same time or something, I understand that. But I will say that we have, as a commission, gone in, buddy teams of two to write towards the CLG grant, and we were successfully awarded. So this is something that I think the commission would step up to versus, putting it at the feet of staff when I know you're already overburdened with plenty of work.
Understood, and thank you for the clarification. I think, we can, I'll first of all, I have to check whether or not we can have more than one CLG grant. I think that would be a point of importance moving forward. For the historic preservation plan, as it stands tonight, I think this is simply a way of introducing you to here is what has existed. Some things that I think for us to think about moving forward, just to keep in your brain, not necessarily we have to answer these questions tonight, but if you have a spare 10 minutes to read, the first section, and then a spare 10 minutes 2 weeks from now, be thinking about what you like about this current plan, what you don't like about the current plan. On top of that, what got implemented, what did not get implemented, and we'd ask you, because your memories of this community are longer than our own at the moment, if, what has occurred, what has not occurred, how has this developed through community channels, perhaps, further than, city actions itself, like what is the community felt in our own sort of maneuverings through preservation, how people care about their communities, their neighborhoods, those sorts of questions. What voices are heard, whose voices are heard in the 1998 plan, whose voices are not heard, other communities that we would want to involve specifically in a new preservation plan, who is preservation for, those types of questions would be great to have in the back of our minds as we continue. Any additional comments that you can think of, welcome for any sort of thoughts on that. And then I think on top of analyzing deeply what the preservation plan says, what should it say, what is our community thinking of, needing, reflecting, I think also looking elsewhere to take inspiration from what else has other commissions done, other communities done. The NAPC does provide several example preservation plans. None of them are directly applicable to a community like Urbana. They may have elements here or there that you think, oh, that's really interesting, or I definitely don't want to do that. But none of them, I think, would be directly transferable as a structure. Staff has looked to other Midwestern college towns for potential context. One of these potentials, it is an outdated plan itself, but around the same time period might provide some interesting context for what was going on with preservation plans in the late 1990s, early 2000s-ish. Iowa City, Iowa has a 2007 preservation plan. They're somewhat of a similar city in terms of population, community focus, university town type factors. Illinois also recently adopted the statewide historic preservation plan. This is for the 10-year period, 2024 to 2034. And their priorities might actually be interesting to think about how state priorities intersect with local action. They have 7 priorities that they are targeting for the statewide preservation plan. Enhancing local preservation, spurring economic growth and resiliency, documenting important resources and striving for positive preservation outcome, engaging the public and shaping the preservation message, forging successful partnerships, promoting diverse history through relevancy and inclusiveness, and building Illinois SHPO capacity. And then, lastly, if you're searching on the internet and you think, I don't know, Madison, Wisconsin's plan is great. Good. Bookmark it, write it down. What do you like? What do you dislike? Those sorts of questions.
5 of those points you just read off pertain to the possibility, we're talking about for this civic, building and all tonight. It will be great to have a preservation plan to which we can point for explanations of what historic preservation is, because the current one is really outdated. It really does reflect the older kind of way of thinking. So I look forward to this.
Yeah, and, go ahead.
And there's a tool which I think we should craft as a Historic Preservation Commission that's very much needed. There is now a PUD discussion for development and of a particular property on West Main Street coming up. I went to the Plan Commission, and 2 members of the Plan Commission, as I recall, they had doubts about, they needed guidance about what they could refer to when they discussed the appropriateness of how a building looked that was being proposed by a developer. And they said, gee, I wish we had like a fact book or a sample book where we could look and see what's appropriate for a small PUD or a big PUD, or for an R2 or an R3 or an R4 zoning that fits that capacity in style or shape or function. So, but there is not one that we have here. And so they were dumb, but they couldn't say anything about it. They couldn't factually point to something that they said, well, it doesn't meet this, and so I'm not going to support it because it's inappropriate. So their concern was flushed down the toilet because there's nothing to guide them, and they don't have anything significant on the books to refer to. And so if you don't have something that's written by the city and adopted by the city, you're lost. And so I think that this commission needs to work on guidance for development, and especially when it comes down to the near historic areas, how things are compatible or incompatible based on the neighboring structures.
Thank you. Yeah, so, I mean, it is getting late. I don't want to beleaguer this, but also I do want to ask that we potentially keep this on our plates. It doesn't have to be next month, but, that we just keep it at a time when we can just have more productive discussion.
Thank you. And we will have, July, we will have the CLG study session. I can keep this on the agenda if we prefer as well. We can if you want to continue this, I believe the motion must be had to continue it to July.
Okay, we need to make a motion for that. Okay. Is there a motion to continue the discussion?
I so moved.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
And anyone against? Okay, all right. Moving on then. There are not any announcements that I'm aware of. Although I did just want to mention, because I neglected to do it in the beginning, for those who did not hear, the mayor did a proclamation for May for the Historic Preservation Month. And David and I were able to attend, and it was just a lovely affair. And so I meant to bring that actual proclamation, so I'll bring it the next time. But it was nice to be acknowledged like that. Okay, that's it. I'm going to adjourn us now. So we're now going to adjourn the public meeting at 9:25 p.m. No business will be discussed after this meeting is adjourned. And thank you, everyone, for coming and for your time.
There would need to be a motion to adjourn.
All right. We don't normally do that, but we can do that.
Sorry.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
In a second?
Second.
Oh,
I don't know.
yeah, we haven't done that before. We can do it, though.
It can't hurt.
We'll motion and.
I'll second it, please.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 And anyone disagreeing? No.
I'm so impressed by your ability to be comfortable in this. I'm freezing.
Well,
And I'm from a northern place.
About 9, I started to get a little chilly, but